Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Verta Stars Podcast 4th season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because Bruce Coville boards the mothership to discuss his My Teachers and Alien series and more. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Coville. Thank you for coming to the Verta Stars Podcast. You're a very important part of my childhood, and it's great to have you on. It's a big deal for me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So inspire your love for writing and who are your earliest influences?
I can trace my love for writing back to a sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Crandall, who had us write all year long. They didn't do that much back in the dark days. They didn't teach writing, but Mrs. Crandall did. She was doing something that was akin to what's now called whole language. She had us write all year long. I failed at it all year long because we always had to write her prompts, and that just didn't work for me. I can remember it vividly, and this is more than 60 years ago, but I can still remember because we remember our failures better than we remember our successes. She played music for us, and we were supposed to write about how the music made us feel. And she read them all aloud, thank God, with our names attached. Because the other kids did a good job. One kid wrote, "The music makes me feel like an eagle soaring over the countryside." Another kid wrote, "The music makes me feel like a king marching his army up a hill." She got to mine and said, well, the music's getting louder. It's going a little faster now. It was pathetic. I just didn't know how we'd do that stuff. I've got other failures from them I could tell you about, but to cut to the chase, at the end of the year, she did the right thing and said, we're going to write a short story. And she did not say what it was going to be about, but she gave us extended time to work on it, like 3 or 4 weeks. And everybody in the class, including me, wrote a really good story. And that was the first time I thought I would like to be a writer. Now, you know, when you're a kid, you change your mind. When you're going to be a writer, then you're going to be a ballet dancer, then you're going to be a ditch digger, then you're going to be an astronaut. But I kept coming back to writing. By the time I was a teenager, about 16 or 17, I was very, very serious about it. The first writing that I read that made me think, I want to write like this, was Edgar Rice Burroughs. He's not as well known now as he should be, because I adore him. And of course, he's best known for creating Tarzan, one of the very few things that are known basically around the world. It's an incredible thing to create a character that is known around the world. But the books I loved were John Carter of Mars. And I discovered one of those books in my own. And of course, Burroughs is best known for creating Tarzan. And that's an amazing thing because it's one of the very few people, very few characters, Mickey Mouse, Ronald McDonald, Tarzan, the Three Musketeers, that are literally known everywhere around the world. It's an amazing thing. He was not a great writer. He was a great storyteller. You don't read Burroughs for the prose, you read it for the world building and the storytelling. What really, really I loved was John Carter of Mars, his John Carter series, which I discovered because I bought at my uncle's country store, as they used to do back in the 1960s, a paperback with the cover torn off, which he sold for $0.25. And I read The Synthetic Men of Mars, which is far into the series, but I was absolutely hooked. And he became my ideal for what I wanted to write, how I wanted to write. Not for the prose. He was not a prose stylist. He was a great storyteller and a great world builder. He was my first influence. And I learned from him pace and chapter endings. And then I went on to read lots of fantasy and science fiction, but Mrs. Crandall got me started. A couple other teachers on the road said, yeah, you can be a writer. That they really told me I was good. It was like my 8th grade teacher, my 10th grade teacher. But something like that really gives you fuel to go on with. And by the time I was 16 or 17, I was determined to be a writer. Now, my first goal was to write for Marvel Comics. That didn't work out, although I did manage as a freshman to bring Stan Lee to speak at my college, which is really the high point of my entire college career. I was a freshman. Everything went downhill after that, but bringing him to speak was the most awesome thing I could have possibly done as a freshman.
That's also, and I think what I love most about the story, because I'm a teacher during the day, I'm an ELA teacher, is that it only takes one, right, in your lifetime. It
Yeah.
takes just the one teacher.
Yes.
And
I taught elementary school for 7 years, and I would like to believe that I was the one for some of them. That was 50 years ago, and I'm still in contact with some of my students.
oh, that's awesome. Now, I guess the important question is, was that teacher an alien or were you? As we'll get to shortly. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a quote from a speech that you gave, if you don't mind. I found
No?
some of your YouTube speeches, and I want to reference one that I think the speech was amazing, a really good one. I'm going to read the quote that you gave. Okay, you gave a speech and you quote a man named Julius Lester, who said the primary purpose of story is one heart touching another. So, can you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
Well, Julius Lester was one of the great children's book writers, fabulous man. And yes, one heart touching another. Real writing, great writing, comes from the heart. And it comes when you're willing to expose your heart and be, in a way, kind of naked on the page. Um, you mentioned this is from a speech I made. Becoming a public speaker was the last thing I had in my mind. I think anybody has on their mind when they work to become a writer. Writers have to be by themselves in their rooms, be willing to be alone. And then as soon as you're all at all successful at it, people say, now come out and talk about it, which is the last thing most writers want to do because they're pretty introverted. I have the good luck to be a writer who is also a raging extrovert. Someone was asked to come out and speak. I thought, why are you asking me to come out and speak? I don't know what the hell to do. But it's turned into a major part of my career. Uh, and to my astonishment, it has literally brought me all over the world. I have spoken on 5 continents. Just totally unexpected. But this goes back to the quote you're reading, in that I've tried to take the same approach in speaking that I have in writing, which is to basically, in mostly speaking, be naked, to bare my heart, not to have a shield between me and the audience, to, as directly as I can, speak my heart and speak direct to the audience. Um, that helped when I became a storyteller by accident. As I was coming out speaking more and more, I started my first book, a picture book called The Foolish Giant. And I would hold it and read it. And after a while, I realized nobody can see the picture because now there's 200 people in this gymnasium. And I know the story. So I put the book down and just told it. And that was a life changer, a game changer for me, because it is just you telling the story. The barriers are down. You're speaking straight from the heart. And I learned that the power of storytelling and how it still works for kids and adults because we're all hungry for story. The I used to work for a magazine, edited a magazine called Seniority, which was for senior citizens. Now I'm one. And I had the chance to interview William Kennedy, the year he won the Pulitzer for Ironweed. And he said something I've never forgotten. He said, my entire generation is longing for a good story well told. There's 2 parts of that, a good or a great story well told. And that's kind of what I strive for. You never know if you're going to hit that mark or not, but it's the goal for every story.
I think it's kind of interesting also that you mentioned that for two amazing things about you. You've published about I think it was over 100 books that have
Yes.
been published in multiple languages worldwide, and you said you spoke on 5 different continents, which is honestly one thing I'm thinking about is 2 things: cultural differences, language differences across that great expanse. As someone who's been to 5 continents and spoke to it and written books that have been translated in that many different languages and read senior books translated that many times, is a story a great story regardless of language and culture?
Yes, I think so. There are many great stories translated. And I should clarify that when I've spoken on other continents, it has always been at the invitation of a school where English is the primary language. Almost every major city has an American school for the kids of diplomats and military top brass that are there. So language was not a barrier. But in all those continents, I've also made it a point to tour and add on extra time. Um, but I always, the other side of that, an additional part of that question that you asked, leads to the idea of translation. And translation is an art in itself. And a lot of people don't realize that AI will never be able to do translation for literary works. It just is impossible. Let me give you an example. I just had a great example of that. I've written a story. It's about a young man who has to go and care for his grandmother who's dying. He's very close to her, and he's kind of lost himself. And the opening line is, "It was a house full of white bread and death." And the Japanese translator contacted my editor, who sent the question to me, saying, "What does this mean? Is the house really full of white bread?" And I thought it's such a distinct cultural thing. And it took me a long time to try to explain to her how white bread has come to mean sort of things without edge or spice or grit. Um, so that sentence is about a woman who's closed in herself and just waiting to die. And that is not something that you can literally translate. It just can't be done. Another example, in a book where the girl, first person female, which I like to write occasionally, is trying out for a show. And in the text, she says, "I prepared tomorrow from Annie," which is embarrassing because every other girl had prepared the same thing. And the French translator, changed it to "Singing Castle in the Clouds" from Les Mis, because culturally that was much more appropriate. It had this exact same effect and resonance, but it was a totally different thing, but it was a correct translation.
That you mentioned, right? Sometimes like to write from a girl's perspective, right? Now, talking about
Mm-hmm.
the idea of reaching from one heart to another, I kind of feel like, the idea of trying to write from a perspective of a gender perspective or another culture or anything that's not you. How does that help you just try to understand these just other people? Because they talk about like walking in other people's shoes, understand these other people or what other people may be thinking about because you're now trying to write in a voice that isn't directly like yours.
Um, I am, among other things, an actor. Um, and when I'm teaching writing, I have a list of off the wall things that I suggest to writers. And one of them is to take acting lessons. Even if you have no desire to act, acting lessons are a useful exercise because the essence of acting is putting yourself in someone else's skin.
Hmm.
You have to learn empathy. And empathy is the point of writing, really, and why stories are so important. Because if you read a story, if it's a well-written story, you become one with the character. You learn to feel what someone else is thinking and feeling, to experience what they're feeling. Elon Musk recently made a very stupid statement about empathy being the primary problem or sin of America. Empathy is the single thing that keeps this vast and diverse country from flying apart at the seams. The ability to think about and understand what other people feel and to empathize with them. I think it is the single most important virtue that you can learn as a human being is empathy.
Now, when I first started teaching a new class, right? Like I said, as an English teacher, I started off with a question that kids always would ask me every year, why are we doing this? What's the point? Why am I reading Shakespeare from how many hundred years ago? Blah blah blah. And what I used to tell them, and you could argue with it, but I think is that fiction is the search for truth, or right? English is the search for truth within fiction. It gives a chance to all have a common reference and understand the world from a common point of view to now discuss it from a story, right? And I think that's and I kind of think that's very similar to the idea of empathy as well. The idea that um, because we all have our perspectives for each other are so different, we're never actually going to be understanding completely each other, but give someone a story, you can understand that character because now you have all that you need to know about that character, and that allows you to have that common reference to have a real discussion about why people are the way they are, why society and all that other stuff builds in.
Precisely, that's the exact point. It is to walk in someone else's shoes in your imagination.
And I think when you're thinking about stories that you're writing, because once again you've written 100 stories, usually young audience stories. Um, are you thinking first the idea? Are you thinking first the entertainment? Or are you thinking first like the message you want to share?
Oh, the message is the last thing you should be thinking about in most stories. The worst way to write a story is to say, "I'm going to write a story to teach a lesson." That leads to Sunday school newsletters. Um, you you write the story, and if you're any kind of a human being, the things that you believe rise up into the story. So I've written a couple stories out of anger to make a point, but the thing is, the point is, the goal is to tell a story that will pull the reader into another person's skin and give them a sense of what it's like to deal with whatever they're dealing with.
Now, once again, going to the idea that you write a lot of YA novels, younger audience novels. Now, like you said, for me, it's gonna be the My Teacher books are the ones I grew up on. I just remember there's certain books when you're young that you just hold on to your brain forever, and those were the books for me. And I think it's kind of interesting that you do focus on younger readers. Do you kind of feel like adults are kind of like too fixed in their own beliefs to be moved by the story the same way a kid can be then transformed by what they read?
Um, no, well, some adults are. And I will tell you, when I was teaching, there were teachers in the faculty didn't say, well, I haven't read a book since I got out of college. And my impulse would have been to say, then what the fuck are you doing here in this job? Go get something, get out of the way and make room for somebody who really wants to teach these kids to read. And
Right.
that's just a pet peeve of mine. In fact, I got so engaged in my pet peeve, I'm not sure I remember your questions.
But the question was, um, because you write for like younger kids who and try to teach, and you're able to teach empathy, things of that nature. Do you find that adults are too kind of fixed are now in their mindset that they can't be moved by story the same way?
No, it depends on the adult, basically. A lot of adults do keep, cherish, and nourish their inner child. A lot of them don't. And honestly, those people tend to have kind of sad lives, I think. They've shut off an important part of their life. Um, to be able to experience something with childlike wonder, to be able to set aside all you know and just throw yourself into a story is a grand and glorious thing. And if you lose that ability, partly because you stop reading when you get out of college or don't have to do it anymore, you still lose something really wonderful.
Now, one of the themes that I mentioned, which are also my favorite books, like the Alien books. Aliens are a theme in a lot of your works, even beyond the My Teacher books. They're a big theme. Um, and honestly, as you know, as the writer, that they often signify the other. So, why is that an important theme to visit in your novels?
Okay. For me, the point of writing alien stories is that aliens can look at our culture from the outside and ask the questions that we don't ask because we're so embedded in our own culture.
Hmm.
They can look at us and say, why are you people doing this? Why do you act this way? And it's a way to do, there's two great things about writing aliens. One is it's a great source of comedy because two different cultures, all the way back to Beverly Hillbillies, you just fish out of water stories. Aliens come here, they don't get us, we don't get them. Great opportunity for comedy. But it's also a great way to make social statements, to talk about really important things within a framework that's funny and engaging, but you can really talk about things that you, as me as a writer, want to talk about. Why is the world hungry when there's enough freaking food to feed everybody? And that's, of course, becomes part of that fourth My Teacher's an Alien book, which is, I think, possibly the most radical book ever written for middle grade kids. And I got away with it because it was a paperback original, fourth book in a paperback original science fiction series. So the guardians of the gates, the readers, the reviewers, as far as at that point, as far as like most librarians and reviewers were concerned, literature only existed between hardcovers. So that book, My Teacher Flunked the Planet, which is literally my best-selling book ever, over 1.5 million copies, is a secret between me and several million kids. And I know it still works, and I know it works for adults because I don't know if you know this, but I run an audiobook company because I'm an idiot. And the company does full cast recordings. We created that form. A lot of people do it now, but Tim Ditlow, who was my first business partner in audiobooks, he and I created that format. Nobody had done it before. Unabridged full cast. The BBC did that kind of thing, but they always abridged heavily. We did unabridged text. And 4 or 5 years ago, we recorded My Teacher Flunked the Planet. And I can tell you, there was no adult in the room. And I can tell you that during the recording of that book, the engineers, the adult actors, There was not one adult in that room that did not cry at some of the scenes in that book. Yeah, it's a kid's book, but that doesn't mean you can't read it and take it in at an adult level. Kids are the main characters, but we've all been kids. We should be able to empathize with them. And the story does pack a punch that way.
Now, I kind of think of I'm going to butcher the quote, but it comes close to the quote of Steven Spielberg, who he talked about how his earlier works, aliens were always viewed kind of aspirationally as almost like saviors. Towards the end, he when he started doing more the War of the Worlds and some of the other stuff, he got his because his view of aliens turned into a very like negative view for them. In your mind, is that idea still aspirational of what what advanced aliens would be for us?
Yes, it is still aspirational. I mean, it's laid out in some of the books. Basically, I want to believe in my heart that any species that manages to figure out travel to other planets with all the limits and barriers there are to it will be smart enough to have gotten rid of war.
You'd hope.
Now, a lot of series, a lot of science fiction is based on denying that, think there's going to be intergalactic wars.
Hmm.
I'm an optimist by nature, and I would really like to believe that anybody who's smart enough to get off their own planet is not going to be doing that shit anymore.
I would imagine, and I'm just guessing, any species that's um, advanced enough to travel across worlds is also too would have weaponry too powerful to not have grown beyond the need to not destroy themselves, or they would.
Yes, exactly.
Because at that point your weaponry is too strong, and either you have used destroyed yourself already because you had it, or you figured out maybe this is the best move and you grow beyond it.
Perfect. Those are the two options. Perfectly stated.
Thank you. I'm gonna state another quote of yours, but I will preface this one by saying I found this one on your Wikipedia page, so it may be wrong. Okay, so like I said, this quote is from Wiki, so if it's wrong, just let me know. But it sounded interesting. It's the quote is that even with over 100 books, you said it gets harder and harder to write each successive book. You're concerned with maintaining this level of quality and not repeating yourself. Is that still a concern? Is like how do you work around something like a concern like that with your books, or is it even not a real quote at all?
It is absolutely a concern. It's something that's it's just a problem that I have. I think everybody wants to everybody who works in the creative arts wants to continue to get better. And one of the things that I use to ameliorate that feeling, that fear, is I talk about, and I've done this in public speeches sometimes, career of Shakespeare. I mean, he wrote Hamlet, he wrote Macbeth, he wrote Romeo and Juliet. He also wrote Titus Andronicus. And, it's not an ever going onward march to greatness, up and up and up and up. There's ups and downs. There have to be. Now, that doesn't mitigate the emotional sense that I have. I want to make this one better than the one before. And that becomes particularly important in series work because you don't want to let the reader down. I Tamara Pierce is one of my closest friends. She does the Lana books. She's hugely popular among young women. She basically invented Girls Who Kick Ass fantasy fiction. And we made a pact about 15 years ago that friends don't let friends write the Dolphins of Pern. I did not want to be going downhill, which is why there are only 4 My Teachers and Alien books. The 4th one was so successful. They were dying for me to do more. But the story was over. They offered me a shit ton of money. But I didn't have a better story in mind. I'd said everything I wanted to say, and I stopped because I did not want to let the series drift downward. As I won't name them because don't want to shame by naming, but anyone in science fiction can list series that went downhill because they went on too long.
Now, as you mentioned, my teacher alien books once again were the ones that I just remember clamoring for them when I was a kid. Because I mean, I'm 45, so this is going back some years, but I really did love them so much. Were they always intended to be a series of books, or did you just sort of My Teacher and Alien, it just kept on going?
No, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the backstory of how that happened.
Okay.
And most of my books have stupidly long backstories because it's a mix of luck and things connecting. The easy references are Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. These were created by the Stratemeyer Syndicate, by Stratemeyer himself, and then he just hired different people to write the stories. Nancy Drew had one writer for a long time, but mostly they were just people who were moonlighting newspaper reporters or whatever that would write these stories. Well, this still goes on. And I was working for a packager named Byron Price, and he and a business partner, two different packagers that worked together because they were friends and had so many ideas, they had to start a third company to work on the ideas they created together. And I would write Bibles for them. A Bible is a guide to what a series is going to be. So they would hire me to create a Bible that create the world, the characters, plot ideas. And we had done a thing called Camp Haunted Hills. It was supposed to be teen terror novels. And the idea was that I would write the series if they sold it, or I would at least have first dibs on it. So they paid me for writing the Bible. 2 years later, they called me and said, well, we've sold it. It's now not terror YA, it is middle grade. So 2 years later, I heard from them that they've sold the series, but now it is middle grade, funny, scary instead of teen horror. That was home territory. So I said, yeah, I'd like to do that still. And they made a deal for 6 books. But the editor who made the deal got fired. And the new editor said, I don't want 6 books about Camp Haunted Hills. But to save the contract, Byron suggested, well, okay, what if Bruce writes 2 of those books? Then we do 2 standalone books. And then if Camp Haunted is successful, we'll go back and do 2 more. And they said, the editor said, okay, we can try that. They called me and said, so what do you want to write? And I said, it was his partner, Dan, who called. I said, Dan, if you're going to keep the bulk of the money, which you do when you're a packager, then you come up with the idea. My idea is I keep all the money. He said, Bruce, you're right. Okay. So they brought me into New York, and I sat down at a table across from Byron. And he started handing me 1 page, 10, 15 sentence lines long story ideas. Dog named Boo. I said, yeah. Monster of the Year. I said, I can write that one. My teacher's an alien. I would have liked to jump across the desk and grab him by the throat because it was the best title I had ever heard, and I hadn't thought of it myself. What he did not know was that I was oddly appropriate to write that book. Because when I was in about 4th, 5th, 6th grade, a rumor went around our school that aliens were going to land on a specific day, let's say it was April 16th, and take away all the kids. Now, nobody really believed that. But the more we talked about the story, the more real it became. When you say the same thing, no matter how it is, over and over again, it takes on a weird kind of reality. It's what I call the Fox News principle. So I knew what it was like to be in a school. Kids were talking about, what are you going to do with the alien comes? And I used that experience as part of the basis for writing the story. It was to be a standalone, but it took off in a crazy way. When it was published, it sold more copies in its first year than my previous, 20 books had sold in the previous 12 years, all put together. And we were getting letters. Oh my God, the letters started coming in. Now, I had ended the story with a trick I learned from Eleanor Cameron. You're talking about early influences. Eleanor Cameron wrote the Mushroom Planet books, which are about the only science fiction that was available when I was a kid. And she had a trick. Now, I never met her, but I consider her one of my teachers. I consider all the writers I loved my teachers. She had a trick of wrapping up the story, but then ending with an image that left you with a question you couldn't stop thinking about, which is what I did with My Teacher's an Alien. In that book, one of the kids chooses to go off with the alien, and the narrator, Susan, first person female, talks about going out at night, looking at the stars and wondering what's happened to him. But we got thousands of letters saying, what happened next? What happened next? What happened next? So they were eager for me to do more books. And I thought the only reason to do more of these is to kind of really drag this into social consciousness area. So I did the rest of the additional books. And that's also why I cut it off when I did, because they wanted more. But it gave me a chance to talk about things that were really important to me. But it came about through this odd fluke of working with the packager, something got canceled. And this is the way a lot happens in publishing. Luck is a huge part of publishing. And any writer who's very successful that doesn't admit luck was part of it is probably lying, because luck is an essential element in packaging. There was several steps along the way that led to that incredibly successful series. They were just chances of fortune or misfortune that led to that moment when I could do those books. It could have derailed any point. And that's the thing about there's long stories behind most of my books because stuff happens.
Now, I mean, obviously you love everything you write. Obviously, as you said, you do your best for every book that you write. And then something like My Teacher's an Alien, which, like I said, it's just such a cornerstone book, I think, for young adults. At some point working on it, did you know, do you kind of feel like electricity when you're like, this is something beyond every, you know what I'm saying? This is a cornerstone for me.
Yes. I had once in my life earlier, 10 years earlier, I think, I'd been contracted to write a paperback novel. And the book that I turned in was so good, and I'm saying this from the publisher's point of view because it was their idea, not mine. They said, we're taking this out of the line that you wrote it for, which is to be high interest, low reading level. We're taking it out and making a standalone hardcover. And I did a lot of paperbacks after that, and I never said again, oh, let's make this a hardcover. But when I wrote My Teacher's an Alien, I said to the editor, I think we should talk about this for hardcover. They didn't do that. But after 15 years, when they repackaged the books at one point, they did hardcover editions, which is a rare thing to happen, to go from paperback to hardcover the same book later on. Yeah, I knew I had something special with that one.
Now, I mean, I know, what was it, 7 years ago, one of your books were turned into a film. Did you think of My Teacher as an Alien, something that I'm sure people have come to you and said, let's make this into a movie. Nothing that's successful doesn't have that question, but something that,
Jeff, this is a thorn in my side for 30 years now. Byron and Dan, who I mentioned, the people who I wrote this for,
yeah,
got snookered. They thought they were the smartest guys in the room. And in New York, they were, but they went to Hollywood and got snookered. And they signed a very bad contract that let a low-level producer, for a minimum amount of money, lock the book up in perpetuity. I have dealt with, for the last 30 years, probably 3 to 4 contacts a year from people who say, I wanted to make a movie from this ever since I was 12. I'm 35 now. I'm in the industry. I have contacts. And I have to tell them over and over and over again, 3 or 4 times every year, I have to say, I'm sorry, it's tied up in this bad contract. They'll say, who's it with? Maybe we can do business. I would name the producer and they'd go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm working now who desperately wants to make that as a film and wants to tackle that production company. But I don't know if I wish them luck. I would love to see it made as a film. Millions of people would love to see it made as a film, I think, because I hear it all the time. It is probably the most unfortunate incident of my publishing career is the rights for the film rights for that book getting tied up the way they are.
So when you're thinking about the whole series of books, basically there were 3 at any given point, 3 characters or protagonists: Peter, Duncan, Susan.
Yeah.
Which of those characters are you most proud of how they develop across your series?
Duncan, without a question. Duncan is based on a real kid that I had in my class when I was a teacher. I had him 1, 2, 3, 4 times. I started teaching. I came as a student teacher at the first grade level and worked with him. They hired me in the same school. When he got to 2nd grade, a couple years later, and again, then he went to 3rd grade, but came back to me for a special reading program. Then I had him again when I moved to 4th grade. And he was a constant thorn in my side, but he was a sweet kid at heart. His name is Stephen. Typical story. Cold, snowy day like we have in Syracuse, where I live. Indoor recess. Got my class, my teaching partner's class, 50 kids around the room having a good time. 5 kids come trotting over to me. They go, Mr. Cole, Stephen flushed a banana down the toilet. It's all plugged up. I said, Stephen, get over here. Now, these were words he was used to hearing because I said it 3 or 4 times a day. Stephen, get over here. He came running over and he stood in front of me. He was built kind of like a fire plug, had a face like a full moon with a crooked on top, great big glasses. looked up and he said, yeah, this is a direct quote. Yeah. I said, Stephen, did you, Stephen, did you flush a banana down the toilet? His answer, and this is a direct quote, was, yeah. I said, why? He said, I wanted to see what would happen, which was what life with Stephen was like. Now, how can you not use a kid like that in a book? I've used him in 5, actually, because he's also the model for the bully in The Monster's Ring. But I will tell you that to keep things interesting, when they convinced me to write more books, I decided to change points of view for each book to make the writing task more interesting myself. And writing the second book, told from Stephen's point of view, first person, meant that I had to imaginatively project myself into his life. We're going right back to the discussion we had about empathy. Why did he act the way he did? And I will tell you, I probably learned more from writing that book than any other book I've written. And I wish deeply I had done it when I was still a teacher. It would have made me a better teacher. And I recommend to any teacher who's got a kid that's probably giving him trouble, write a story from that kid's point of view and see what you learn. So what happens with Duncan through the course of the books, I think is the most interesting of the character arcs. Although my favorite scene is Peter's reconciliation scene with his father, which I got to act because we recorded that. I played the father, and I had this amazing kid here in Syracuse. It's interesting what can happen in a small city. This kid lives 20 miles outside of our city in a small town, but he has a Hollywood agent and a Broadway agent. And he was picked by Disney. He played one of the 3 boys, because when the kids play leads in Broadway shows, they triple cast them. Had the lead in the touring company of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And he was picked by Disney to play the lead in Better Nate Than Ever. But he was right here, and our audio company used him. So I had a chance to act against this kid and do that scene. And it was probably my favorite moment in the studio ever. It's a scene I love, and I had a brilliant acting partner.
That's cool.
It made me very happy.
I think another thing interesting about how the series ends with my teacher flunked the planet is the idea that the determination by like the alien council that humanity must evolve alone. The aliens are going to help still, but still humans have to evolve like kind of like on their own pace. With the aliens help, is that a contradictory idea, or is it help? Is it the idea that you still need, even if you're doing it on your own, you still need somebody's help to make sure to still guide you along? Can you kind of dive into that idea?
I would boil it down to a simple statement. No matter who you are, you need a mentor. And we as a planet, needed mentors.
So when you think about humanity, do you think in Star Trek terms where that is the eventual direction? Because I know Star Trek is like the idea is like the key to like the ideal of like that perfect future for humanity. Is that, or do you kind of view it in that same term?
That would be the long-term goal. Yes, I hope we can evolve to that point.
I I think like I said, your books are just so amazing. Um, what?
Thank you.
No, like I said, like it's. I mean, it's going back 30 something years, but the fact I can still remember your books is says something. Is a testament to your books. So like, what else? How else are you challenging yourself in your future books?
I think that the next stage of my career may be script writing. I'm actually I've just been commissioned to write graphic novel scripts based on 2 of my books. I've written 1 film script already. I've written 3 children's musicals, and I did spend 2 years, or misspent 2 years, I don't know if anything will come of this, rehabilitating the book and lyrics for a science fiction rock opera that has a brilliant score, but a book that absolutely did not work. And because I've been saying for decades now, when I grow up, I don't want to write musical theater. I love musical theater. When this opportunity fell into my lap, because I had a connection with a guy who was connected to this absolutely brilliant composer. I mean, I've banged heads against him while we're working this project, but he's absolutely brilliant. And the score of this thing is gorgeous. So I spent 2 years working on that, which we're theoretically going to the UK in fall to record, which I think is kind of crazy, but that's the way he wants to do it. He's got the money to do it. Um, and I'm dealing with the producer right now and making a commission to write the script for another one of my books. So um, I've got more books I'd like to write. I've got a stack of index cards with the 10 books I would like to tackle next. But, I take what's in front of me. I'm enjoying writing the scripts right now.
Well, like I said, anytime you want to talk about any of your new projects, this show is for you. Please come back on. Mr. Coville, it's an absolute honor to talk to you, sir. And little me from many years ago would be so excited to know what I got to do today. So thank you so much for this, sir.
It took me a while to get used to people talking that way. And then I finally told myself, oh, think how you would have felt if you could talk to Edgar Rice Burroughs or Eleanor Cameron. So I get that, and I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it very much. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a fantastic night.
You too. Take care.